Okay. Hi, Fran. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you, Douglas. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
I detect a British accent.
You are quite the detective. I've often been asked if I'm from Australia or South Africa or other places, but you are correct. It is from England.
Okay. Where from England? Which part?
I'm from a county called Suffolk, which is on the east coast. It's about 3 hours northeast of London on the east coast, in a region called East Anglia. If you look at a map of England, it looks like a giant dog sitting down, looking over its shoulder, and there's a big hip, looks like a
Yeah.
dog's hip.
Okay.
So I'm in the hip. I'm in the hip.
Okay. So south would be Dover on that coast.
Yes, I'm on the East Coast.
Okay. All right. So I haven't been there in a long time. I don't imagine it's changed too much, but
Not much.
I remember thinking that it was so small because
Yeah.
compared to America, and one of the things we wanted to do was to drive from one end to the other. And my friend who was from Scotland said, "Oh, don't bother." He said, it's not like America with the beautiful road trip sort of thing. He said, if you want to just take the train because
Right.
it's. So we took the train from London to Glasgow, and that was nice.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it is nice. It is nice to drive it if you can get off, if you know the back roads and you can go through some of the scenic villages. It is lovely, but a lot of, people that are used to driving here can get on a freeway and just go from A to B in a straight line. And in England, you just don't often have that. I mean, you'll have a couple of motorways, which is our version of the freeway, but most of the driving's in the back streets through villages, and you spend most of the time driving at 35 or 40 miles an hour, and it takes twice as long to get anywhere.
So how long have you been in the United States?
Um, well, this time round, almost 20 years. We moved here in 2002. And I say this time round because my husband is an American, and we met when he was in the Air Force, the United States Air Force, stationed in the United Kingdom. And so we did come back and forth a couple of times while he was still in the military before we then settled in the UK. We were there for 13 years before we then moved here in 2002.
So where is home for you in the United States?
Currently, we live in Montana. We just
Montana.
moved to Montana.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah,
how do you like Montana?
we love it. We love it. We were in California for 13 years and then moved to Washington State for a few years, but we had this opportunity to buy a beautiful property in Montana. We have got some acreage that we've always wanted, and we're now going to turn it into a little farmstead and live off the land. We've been so excited to do that for so many years, and now our opportunities come before us, so we grabbed it.
Oh, that sounds lovely. That sounds great. Something I'd like to do, I think,
Yeah.
someday. Winter is a little rough there, though.
It can be. We're actually very blessed, Douglas. We live in what's called the banana belt of the state. We live in a little valley called the Bitterroot Valley, which is on the west side of the state, and it's flanked between two mountain ranges. We have the Sapphire Mountain Range and the Bitterroot Mountain Range, two ranges of the Rockies, and we're sandwiched in there, so we're very protected, and we don't have the rough winters that the rest of Montana is known for.
So what do you do? What do you do there?
Oh, I do. Well, here currently, I have a million things I do, but currently I'm the deputy director of the Ravalli County Office of Emergency Management, and that basically means I work for the sheriff. I work at the sheriff's office here in the county, and I'm the deputy director for all mitigation, preparedness, response of disasters that might happen in our county.
Okay, and you're also an author, and you've got a
I'm
book.
also an author, yeah. So the reason why I'm here today is because in the United Kingdom, I was a police officer in the county of Suffolk for a few years. And in that career, I sadly became one of the officers that crashed and burned due to acute stress caused by the nature of the job. And in those days, we didn't have the wonderful support that is provided to first responders nowadays. And I made it my mission when we moved to the US to do everything I could to make sure that first responders, whether they are fire or police or ambulance or disaster relief workers, don't crash and burn like I did. So I got educated, I did a bunch of training, and for the last 10 years, I've been working as an emotional trauma responder. Under the title of chaplain, I am an ordained pastor, so I do work as a chaplain in the faith field. But outside of the faith field, I'm an emotional trauma responder or a peer support specialist, meaning that I work with people no matter what walk of life they've come from, what their experiences are. But I have some good education and some good tools that I share with them to help them deal with some of their trauma. The issue is that so many people are in so much pain, and I can only spread myself so thin. I'm certainly not the only one doing what I do. I do train and educate others to do it, but I decided to put my material in a book so that more people could have access to the support I would give them if I was walking alongside them personally. So yeah, the book was that mission.
And the title is called What to Do When Life Sucks, which is a nice title. Do you want to hold up your book so we can see the cover?
Yeah, it's right here. What to Do When Life Sucks.
And so just to repeat, this came out of your experience as a police officer and your emotional issues that you had after you left. Were you just taking it all home with you and you didn't find a way to separate what you were experiencing during the day and when you came home at night, that it just stayed with you?
That's part of the problem. But the other part of the problem, Douglas, is that sadly, and it still does happen nowadays, but not as much as it did 20 years ago. But sadly, when I tried to speak to people at work about it, I had to be very, very careful, because there was in those days, and there still is now in certain first responder agencies, a stigma where you shouldn't mention the word crisis or stress or trauma, because people can feel that they're going to lose their jobs. They can feel that people will think less of them. That certainly in the police background, if you know of somebody who is struggling with acute distress or trauma, there has been a belief that you don't think they'll be able to hold it together when something really bad happens, and they may not have your back. And so there can be an element of distrust of people that can't manage the job. So when I did go to help, I went to my sergeant for help, and I went to a couple of other officers and said, I'm not doing well. Basically, I was told to suck it up, get back out there on the line and do my job, because everyone has to deal with the sort of stuff that I was dealing with, and there's nothing that can be done about it. And that's what I was told. So I continued to push forward with the belief that there's no one to talk to about this. There's no help I can get. I've just got to keep muddling through. But I could only do that for so long. I did try to take it home with me, but my husband didn't understand. And there's an element of not wanting to take some of the nasty stories home to your family, because they don't need to hear some of the stuff you're dealing with at work. So in the end, you become isolated and you feel trapped. And I learned that those were not the ways to deal with it. But that's what I only knew to do that at the time, because I had no other skills. So sadly, I crashed and burned, and I ended up losing my career. So because of that, I didn't want other people to go through that. My book it does talk about some of these situations I went through as a police officer, but I also have experienced so many horrific traumatic events outside of law enforcement. And so the book shares several different stories from different things that I personally have been through that have taught me different elements of how to recognize signs and symptoms of stress, to know what to do about it, and to recognize those in other people, which is how I then got the skills to help people that I do today.
Can you give us one example from the book of something you might recommend for people who are dealing with the stress? It sounds very similar to PTSD.
It is, it is very similar, Douglas. The thing is, when people use the word distress or stress or crisis, what they don't sometimes understand is there are so many different elements of signs and symptoms of emotional trauma or emotional distress. And there are different labels that have been put on. Everybody at some point in their life will experience PTS, which is post-traumatic stress. Whenever we go through something stressful, it's very common for us to experience post-traumatic stress. That's very different to having the post-traumatic stress disorder, or some people now are calling it the PTSI, the post-traumatic stress injury, because it is actually an injury, not a disorder. But one of the things I talk about in the book is learning to be very, very self-aware. If we would slow down enough to take the time to manage and monitor how we respond to things in life that stress us on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about when really nasty things happen. I'm just talking about when life's going fairly well as we would normally expect it to. There are things that still stress us out. And those are the little teaching points that we can use to educate ourselves by self-monitoring how we respond to stressful events. What people don't understand is that they're likely to respond in 5 main ways, and I do talk about that in the book. People will respond emotionally, they will respond mentally, they will respond physically or physiologically, they will respond behaviorally, and they will even respond spiritually, whether they know that or not. Those are the typical areas where we will see people have a reaction to a stressful event. And if they can learn to monitor those responses and pay attention to how they feel when things are going well, and then pay attention to how they feel or how they respond when things aren't going so well, they can learn to recognize when they are getting too stressed about something. And in the book, I try and help them to understand how to put healthy parameters in place before they get too far down that road, as I did. So if they can recognize the signs and symptoms sooner, in the book, I explain how they can apply some tools and tricks of the trade to manage their stress better so that they are healthy and they are stronger, they are more resilient. And if they can do that when things are going fairly well, when that time comes, which it does for all of us, when something serious happens, they're already ahead of the game because they've already learned some good coping mechanisms. And so they will manage the more serious traumatic event in a more healthy way.
I see a word on your bio, holistic. And we see that often, but I think some people might not know the definition. Initially, when I think of holistic, I think of organic or natural, non-chemical, Chinese herbal, if you will. Is that really what it is? Or is there more to it than just that?
That certainly is an element of it, Douglas. And I do encourage people very much when we're talking about their physiological response to stress and trauma. I try to educate people so that they understand that buying and eating organic, wholesome foods, even though it can be very, very expensive, is actually much better for you than eating the non-organic foods, purely because of all of the toxins that are on those foods. So that certainly is an element of it. But holistic also covers the other areas that I mentioned out of the 5 areas. And what people don't understand is that if one of those areas is out of sync, it actually has a knock-on effect to the other 5 areas. So, for example, everyone has had it so drummed into them that we are to have a healthy diet and to exercise and to stay well hydrated, right?
Right.
Everyone knows that. But they don't actually know what it means. A lot of people don't know what it means because a healthy diet to one person is different to another. And our bodies are all different. So my body will process food and digest food and absorb food different to even my husband's. He has very different dietary needs. So we can't just have a blanket statement that says everyone's got to eat this cut out diet. You've actually got to, again, be self-aware so you know what your body thrives on. If you eat a healthy organic diet and you are exercising and you are staying well hydrated, your body is going to function so much better. So then you will not end up having some of the physiological symptoms that people commonly have if they then have ongoing acute distress, or symptoms that they will have because they've had an unhealthy diet all their lives. And so from the dietary point of view, if we aren't giving our body the right nutrients, we aren't going to be able to get the best out of our exercise regime. If we're not staying hydrated, we're not going to be able to get through the day with our brain functioning properly. Our brain is 95% water. And if we don't have enough water in our diet, our brain will actually not function properly on a daily basis. And then people wonder why they're tired or why they can't think straight. Most of the time it's diet and exercise. But they only notice that from a cognitive point of view. Your brain is the powerhouse. It's the main computer chip that controls your whole body. So if your brain's not functioning properly, it's not going to be able to control your conscious and your subconscious mechanisms in your body. Then people wonder why they have adrenal fatigue, or why they have stomach ulcers because of acute distress. Or if people are under acute stress a lot of the time, they have too much adrenaline and cortisol dumped into their bloodstreams. And exercise will help to burn that off. But if you're not exercising, those hormones are constantly dumped into our systems when we are under acute distress, and that helps us gain weight around our middle. The cortisol is the hormone that causes us, unfortunately, to get that ring around our middle. And so people don't understand how the holistic approach will help all across the board. Other things in the holistic mechanism are spiritual things. People need to meditate. And I don't just mean one specific faith over another. People of all faiths need to meditate. They need to take time out just to think about themselves spiritually and how they can fit into the world and how they can fit into nature and absorb from the world and nature around them, because that actually makes us feel better. Getting out for a walk amongst the trees or along the beach and just having that peace and quiet actually makes us feel better. It lifts our spirits. So all of those go well in the holistic pattern of self-care and preventative healthy habits to create an atmosphere of longevity.
Well, I think on that note, we do have to wrap it up. We have kind of run out of time. Do you have a website that you want to give out for your book, or a personal website?
I do, Douglas. Yes, thank you so much. It's basically www.frangraham.com. And that's FranHgraham.com. And on that website, people can find my book. It is also available on Amazon in 10 different nations. And people can also see on the website other speaking topics that I'm happy to talk about.
Great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Nice meeting you. Nice speaking with you.